as often happens, they break it differently in order to shock or embarrass others. They defiantly, yeah, in order to shock or embarrass others. They are not necessarily being unjust, but they are being uncharitable. For it is uncharitable to take pleasure in making other people uncomfortable. I do not think that a very strict or fuzzy standard of propriety is any proof of chastity or any help to it, and I therefore regard the great relaxation and simplifying of the rule which has taken place in my own lifetime as a good thing. At its present stage, however, it has the inconvenience that people of different ages and different types do not all acknowledge the same standard, and we hardly know where we are. While this confusion lasts, I think that old or old-fashioned people should be very careful not to assume that young or emancipated people are corrupt whenever they are, by the old standard, improper, and in return, the young people should not call their elders prudes or Puritans, because they do not easily adopt the new standard. A real desire to believe all the good you can of others and to make others as comfortable as you can will solve most of the problems. Chastity is the most unpopular of the Christian virtues. There is no getting away from it, and the Christian rule is either marriage with complete faithfulness to your partner or else total abstinence. Now this is so difficult and so contrary to our instincts that obviously either Christianity is wrong or our sexual instinct, as it now is, has gone wrong, one or the other. Of course, being a Christian, I think it is the instinct which has gone wrong, but I have other reasons for thinking so. The biological purpose of sex is children, just as the biological purpose of eating is to repair the body. Now, if we eat whenever we feel inclined and just as much as we want, it is quite true most of us will eat too much, but not terrifically too much. One man may eat enough for two, but he does not eat enough for 10. The appetite goes a little beyond its biological purpose, but not enormously. But if a healthy young man indulged his sexual appetite whenever he felt inclined, and if each act produced a baby, then in 10 years he might easily populate a small village. This appetite is a ludicrous and preposterous excess of its function. Or take it another way, you can get a large audience together for a striptease act, that is, to watch a girl undress on stage. Now suppose you come to a country where you could fill a theater by simply bringing a covered plate onto the stage and then slowly lifting the cover, so as to let everyone see just before the lights went out that it contained a mutton chop or a bit of bacon. Would you not think that is a country something bad gone wrong with the appetite for food? And would not anyone who had grown up in a different world think that there is something equally queer about the state of the sex instinct among us? One critic said that if he found a country in which such striptease acts with food were popular, he would conclude that the people of that country were starving. He meant, of course, to imply that such things as a striptease act resulted not from sexual corruption, but from sexual starvation. I agree with him that if in some strange land we found that similar acts with mutton chops were popular, one of the possible explanations which would occur to me would be famine. But the next step would be to test our hypothesis by finding out is less hostile to illicit unions and even to perversions than it has been since pagan times. Nor is the hypothesis of starvation the only one we can imagine. Everyone knows that sexual appetite, like our other appetites, grows by indulgence. Starving men may think much about food, but so do gluttons. The gorge, as well as the famished, like dilations. Here is a third point. You find very few people who want to eat things that really are not food, or to do other things with food instead of eating it. In other words, perversion of the food appetite are rare, but perversions of sex instinct are numerous, hard to cure, and frightful. I'm sorry to have to go into all these details, but I must. The reason why I must is that you and I, for the last 20 years, have been fed all day long on good, solid lies about sex. We have been told, till one is sick of hearing it, that sexual desire is in the same state as any of our other natural desires, and that if only we abandon the silly old Victorian idea of hushing it up, everything in the garden will be lovely. It is not true. The moment you look at the facts and away from the propaganda, you see that it's not. They tell you sex has become a mess because it was hushed up. But for the last 20 years, it has not been. It has been chattered about all day long, yet it is still a mess. If hushing up had been the cause of the trouble, ventilation would have set it right, but it has not. I think it is the other way around. I think the human race originally hushed it up because it had become such a mess. Modern people are always saying sex is nothing to be ashamed of. They may mean two things. They may mean there is nothing to be ashamed of in the fact that a human race reproduces itself in a certain way, nor in the fact that it gives pleasure. If they mean that, they are right. Christianity says the same. It is not the thing nor the pleasure that is the trouble. The old Christian teachers said that if a man had never fallen, sexual pleasure, instead of being less than it is now, would actually have been greater. I know some muddle-headed Christian have talked as if Christianity thought that sex or the body or pleasure were bad in themselves, but they were wrong. Christianity is almost the only one of the great religions which thoroughly approves of the body, which believes that matter is good, that God himself once took a human body, that some kind of body is going to be given to us in heaven, and it is going to be an essential part of our happiness or beauty or our energy. Christianity has glorified marriage more than any other religion, and nearly all the greatest love poetry in the world has been produced by Christians. If anyone says that sex in itself is bad, Christianity contradicts him at once. But of course, when people say sex is nothing to be ashamed of, they may mean the state into which the sexual instinct has now gone is nothing to be ashamed of. If they mean that, I think they are wrong. I think it is everything to be ashamed of. There is nothing to be ashamed of in enjoying your food. There would be everything to be ashamed of. Half the world made food the main interest of their lives and spent their time looking at pictures of food and dribbling and smacking their lips. I do not say you and I are individually responsible for the present situation. Our ancestors have handed over to us organisms which are warped in the respect, and we grow up surrounded by propaganda in favor of unchastity. There are people who want to keep our sex instinct inflamed in order to make money out of us, because of course a man with an obsession perseverance of our will to overcome them. Before we can be cured, we must want to be cured. Those who really wish for help will get it, but for many modern people, even the wish is difficult. It is easy to think that we want something when we do not really want it. A famous Christian long ago told us that when he was a young man, he prayed constantly for chastity. But years later, he realized that while his lips had been saying, "Oh Lord, make me chaste," his heart had been secretly adding, "But please don't do it just yet." This may happen in prayers for other virtues too. But there are 3 reasons why it is now specifically difficult for us to desire, let alone to achieve, complete chastity. In the first place, our warped natures, the devils who tempt us, and all the contemporary propaganda for lust combine to make us feel the desires we are resisting are so natural, so healthy, and so reasonable that it is almost perverse and abnormal to resist them. Poster after poster, film after film, novel after novel associate the idea of sexual indulgence with the ideas of health, normality, youth, frankness, and good humor. Now, this association is a lie. Like all powerful lies, it is based on a truth. The truth acknowledged above, that sex in itself, apart from the excesses and obsessions that have grown around it, is normal and healthy. All the rest of it, the lie consists in suggestion and that any sexual act to which you are tempted at the moment is also healthy and normal. Now, this on the any conceivable view and quite apart from Christianity must be nonsense. Surrender to all our desires obviously leads to impotence, disease, jealousy, lies, concealment, and everything that is that reverse of health, good humor, and frankness. For any happiness, even in this world, quite a lot of restraint is going to be necessary. So the claim made by every desire, when it is wrong to be healthy and reasonable, counts for nothing. Every sane and civilized man must have some set of principles by which he chooses to reject some of his desires and to permit others. One man does this on Christian principles, another on hygienic principles, another on sociological principles. The real conflict is not between Christianity and nature, but between Christian principles and other principles in the control of nature. For nature, in the sense of natural desire, will have to be controlled anyway, unless you are going to ruin your whole life. The Christian principles are admittedly restrict than the others, but then we think you will get towards obeying them, which you will not get towards obeying the others. In the second place, many people are deterred from seriously attempting Christian chastity because they think before trying that it is impossible. But when a thing has to be attempted, one must never think about possibility or impossibility. Faced with an optional question is an examination paper. One considers whether one can do it or not. Faced with a compulsory question, one must do the best one can. You may get some marks for every imperfect answer. You will certainly get none for leaving the question alone. Not only in examination, but in war, in mountain climbing, in learning to skate or swim or ride a bicycle, even in fastening a stiff collar with cold fingers. People quite often do what seemed impossible before they did it. It is wonderful what you can do when you have to. We may indeed be sure that perfect chastity, like perfect charity, will not be attained by any merely human efforts. You must ask God's help. Even when you have done so, it may Never mind. After each failure, ask forgiveness, pick yourself up, and try again. Very often, what God's first helps us towards is not the virtue itself, but just this power of always trying again. For however important chastity or courage or truthfulness or any other virtue may be, this process trains us in habits of the soul which are more important still. It cures our illusions about ourselves and teaches us to depend on God. We learn on the one hand that we cannot trust ourselves even in our best moments, and on the other that we need not despair even in our worst, for our failures are forgiven. The only fatal thing is to sit down content with anything less than perfection. Thirdly, people often misunderstand what psychology teaches about repression. It teaches us that repressed sex is dangerous, but repressed is here a technical term. It does not mean suppressed in the sense of denied or resisted. A repressed desire or thought is one which has been thrust into the subconscious, usually at a very early age, and can now come before the mind only is disguised and unrecognizable form. Repressed sexuality does not appear to the patient to be sexuality at all. When an adolescent or an adult is engaged in resisting a conscious desire, he is not dealing with a repression, nor he is in the least danger of creating a repression. On the contrary, those who are seriously attempting chastity or more conscious and soon know the great deal more about their own sexuality than anyone else, they come to know their desires as Welling knew Napoleon, or as Sherlock Holmes knew Moriarty. As a rat catcher knows rats, or a plumber knows about leaky pipes, virtue, even attempted virtue, brings light, indulgence brings fog. Finally, though I have had to speak at some length about sex, I want to make it as clear as I possibly can that the center of Christian morality is not here. If anyone thinks that Christian regard unchastity as the supreme vice, he is quite wrong. The sins of the flesh are bad, but they are the least bad of all sins. All the worst pleasures are purely spiritual. The pleasure of putting other people in the wrong, of bossing and patronizing and spoiling sport, and backbiting, the pleasures of power, of hatred. For there are two things inside me, competing with the human self, which I must try to become. They are the animal self and the diabolical self. The diabolical self is the worst of the two. That is why a cold, self-righteous prig who goes regularly to church may be far nearer to hell than a prostitute, but of course, it is better to be neither. Okay, chapter 6, Christian marriage. The last chapter that was mainly negative. Okay, the last chapter was mainly negative. I discussed what was wrong with the sexual impulse in men, but said very little about its right working. In other words, about Christian marriage. There are two reasons why I do not particularly want to deal with marriage. There are two reasons why I do not particularly. The first is that the Christian doctrines of this subject are extremely unpopular. The second is that I have never been married myself, and therefore can speak only at second hand. But in spite of that, I feel I can hardly leave the subject out in an account of Christian morals. The Christian idea of marriage is based on Christ's words that a man and wife are to be regarded as a single organism. For that is what the words one flesh would be in modern English. And the Christian believed that when he said this, he was not expressing the sentiment, but stating a fact. Just as one is stating a fact when one says that a lock and its key are one mechanism, or that a violin and a bow are one musical instrument. The inventor of the human machine was telling us that its two halves, the male and female, were made to become combined together in pairs, not simply on the sexual level, but totally combined. The monstrosity of sexual intercourse outside marriage is that those who indulge in it are trying to isolate one kind of union, the sexual, from all the other kinds of union which were intended to go along with it and make a total union. The Christian attitude does not mean that there is anything wrong about sexual pleasure any more than about a pleasure of eating. It means that you must not isolate that pleasure and try to get it by itself anymore, that you ought to try to get the pleasures of taste without swallowing and digesting by chewing things and spitting them out again. As a consequence, Christianity teaches that marriage is for life. There's, of course, a difference between different churches. Some do not admit divorce at all. Some allow it reluctantly in very special cases. It is a great pity that Christians should disagree about such a question. But for an ordinary layman, the thing to notice is that the churches all agree with one another about marriage a great deal more than any of them agrees with the outside world. I mean, they all regard divorce as something like cutting up a living body, as a kind of surgical operation. Some of them think the operation so violent that it cannot be done at all. Others admit it as a desperate remedy in extreme cases. They are all agreed that it is more like having both your legs cut off than it is like solving a business partnership or even deserting a regiment. What they're all disagree with is that is the modern view that is simple readjustment of partners to be made whenever people feel they are no longer in love with one another, or when either of them falls in love with someone else. Before we consider this modern view in its relation to chastity, we must not forget to consider it in the relationship to another virtue named justice. As I said before, includes the keeping of promises. Now everyone who has been married in church has made a public solemn promise to stick to his or her partner till death. The duty of keeping the promise has no special connection with sexual morality. It is in the same position as the other promise. If, as the modern people are always telling us, the sexual impulse is just like all our other impulses, then it ought to be treated like our other impulses. As their indulgence is controlled by our promises, so should itself be. If, as I think, it is not like our other impulses, but is morbidly inflamed, then we should be specifically careful not to let it lead us into dishonesty. To this, someone may reply that he regarded the promise made in church as a mere formality and never intended to keep it. Whom then was he trying to deceive when he made it? God? That was really very unwise. Himself? That was not very much wiser. The bride or bridegroom or the in-laws? That was treacherous. More often, I think, the couple or one of them hoped to deceive the public. They wanted that respectability that is attached to marriage without intending to pay the price. That is, they were imposters. They cheated. If they are still content cheats, I have nothing to say to them. Who would urge the high and hard duty of chastity on people who have not yet wished to be merely honest? If they have now come to their sense and want to be honest, their promise already made constrains them, and this you will see comes under the heading of justice, not that of chastity. If people do not believe in permanent marriage, it is perhaps better that they should live together unmarried than that they should make vows they do not mean to keep. It is true that by living together without marriage, they will be guilty in Christian eyes of fornication. But one fault is not mended by adding another. Unchastity is not improved by adding perjury. The idea that being in love is the only reason for remaining married really leaves no room for marriage as a contract or a promise at all. If love is the whole thing, then the promise can add nothing. And if it adds nothing, then it should not be made. The curious thing is that lovers themselves, while they remain really in love, know this better than those who talk about love. As Chesterton pointed out, those who are in love have a natural inclination to bind themselves by promises. Love songs all over the world are full of vows and eternal constancy. The Christian law is not forcing upon the passion of love something which is foreign to the passion's own nature. It is demanding that lovers should take seriously something which their passion of itself impels them to do. And of course, the promise made when I am in love, and because I'm in love, to be true to the beloved as long as I live, commits me to being true, even if I cease to be in love. A promise must be about things that I can do, about actions. No one can promise to go on feeling in a certain way. He might as well promise never to have a headache or always to feel hungry, but what it may be asked is the use of keeping two people together if they are no longer in love. There are several sound social reasons to provide a home for their children, to protect the woman who has probably sacrificed or damaged her own career by getting married, from being dropped whenever the man is tired of her. But there's also another reason of which I am very sure, though I find it little hard to explain. It is hard because so many people cannot be brought to realize that when B is better than C, A may be even better than B. They like thinking in terms of good and bad, not of good, better, and best, or bad, worst, and worst. They want to know whether you think patriotism a good thing. If you reply that it is, of course, far better than individual selfishness, but that it is inferior to universal charity and should always give way to the universal charity when the two people conflict, they think you are being evasive. They ask what you think of dueling. If you reply that it is far better to forgive a man than to fight a duel with him, but that even duel might be better than a lifelong enmity, which expresses itself in secret efforts to do a man down, they go away complaining that you would not give them a straight answer. I hope no one will make this mistake about what am I now going to say. What we call being in love is a glorious state, and in several ways good for us. It helps to make us generous and courageous. It opens our eyes not only to the beauty of the beloved, but to all beauty and subordinate, especially at first, are merely animal sexuality in that sense. Love is the great conqueror of lust. No one in his sense would deny that being in love is far better than either common sensuality or cold self-centeredness. But as I said before, the most dangerous thing you can do is to take any one impulse of our own nature and set it up as a thing you ought to follow at all costs. Being in love is a good thing, but it is not the best thing. There are many things below it, but there are also things above it. You cannot make it the basis of your whole life. It is a noble feeling, but it is a feeling. Now, no feeling can be relied on to last in its full intensity or even to last at all. Knowledge can last, principles can last, habits can last, but feelings come and go. And in fact, whatever people say, the state called being in love usually does not last. If the old fairy tale ending, there lived happily ever after, is taken to mean they felt for the next 50 years exactly as they felt the day before they were married, then it says that probably never was nor ever would be true, and would be highly undesirable if there were. Who could bear to live in the excitement for even 5 years? What would become of your work, your appetite, your sleep, your friendships? But of course, ceasing to be in love need not mean ceasing to love. Love is a second sense. Love is as distinct from being in love. It's not merely a feeling. It is a deep unity maintained by the will and deliberately strengthened by habit, reinforced by in Christian marriages, the grace which both partners ask and receive from God. They can have this love for each other even at those moments when they do not like each other. As you love yourself even when you do not like yourself, they can retain this love even when each would easily, if they allowed themselves to be in love with someone else. Being in love first moved them to promise fidelity. This quieter love enables them to keep the promise. It is on the love that the engine of marriage is run. Being in love, what was the explosion that started it? If you disagree with me, of course you will say, he knows nothing about it. He is not married. You may quite possibly be right. But before you say that, make quite sure that you are judging me by what you really know from your own experience and from watching the lives of your friends, and not by ideas you have derived from novels and films. This is not so easy to do as people think. Our experience is colored through and through by books and plays and cinema, and it takes patience and skill to disentangle the things we have really learned from life for ourselves. People get from books the idea that if you have married the right person, you may expect to go on being in love forever. As a result, when they find they're not, they think this proves they have made a mistake and are entitled to change, not realizing that when they have changed, the glamour will presently go out of the new love, just as it went out with the old one. In this department of life, as in every other, thrills come at the beginning and do not last. The sort of thrill a boy has at the first idea of flying will not go on when he has joined the RAF and is really learning to fly. The thrill you feel on first seeing some delightful place dies away when you really go to live there. Does this mean it would be better not to learn to fly and not to live in the beautiful place? By no means. In both cases, if you go through with it, the dying away of the first thrill will be compensated for by a quieter and more lasting kind of interest. What is more, and I can hardly find the words to tell you how important I think it is. It is just the people who are ready to submit to the loss of the thrill and to settle down to the sober interest who are then most likely to meet new thrills in some quite different direction. The man who has learned to fly and become a good pilot will suddenly discover music. The man who has settled down to live in a beauty spot will discover gardening. This is, I think, one little part of what Christ meant by saying that a thing will not really live unless it first dies. It is simply no good trying to keep any thrill. That is the very worst thing you can do. Let the thrill go. Let it die away. Go on through that period of death into a quieter interest and happiness that follow. And you will find you are living in the world of new thrills at all time. But if you decide to make thrills your regular diet and try to prolong them artificially, they will all get weaker and weaker and fewer and fewer. You will be bored, disillusioned old man for the rest of your life. It is because so few people understand that you find many middle-aged men and women maundering about their lost youth at the very age when new horizons ought to be appearing, the new doors opening all around them. It is much better fun to learn to swim than to go on endlessly and hopelessly trying to get back the feeling you had when you first went paddling as a small boy. Another notion we get from novels and plays is that falling in love is something quite irresistible, something that just happens to one, like measles. And because they believe this, some married people throw up a sponge and give it in when they find themselves attracted by a new acquaintance. But I am inclined to think that these irresistible passions are much rarer in life than in books. At any rate, when one is grown up, when we meet someone beautiful and clever and sympathetic, of course we ought in one sense to admire and love these good qualities, but it is not very largely in our own choice whether this love shall or shall not turn into what we call being in love. No doubt, if our minds are full of novels and plays and sentimental songs, and our bodies full of alcohol, we shall turn any love we feel into that kind of love, just as if you have a rut in your path, all the rainwater will run into that rut, and if you wear blue spectacles, everything you see will turn blue. But that will be our own fault. Before leaving the question of divorce, I should like to distinguish two things which are very often confused. The Christian conception of marriage is one. The other is quite a different question. How far Christians, if they are voters or members of parliament, ought to try to force their views on marriage on the rest of the community by embodying them in the divorce laws. A great many people seem to think that if you are a Christian yourself, you should try to make divorce difficult for everyone. I do not think that. At least I know I should be very angry if the Mohammedans tried to prevent the rest of us from drinking wine. My own view is that the churches should frankly recognize that the majority of the British people are not Christian and therefore cannot be expected to live Christian lives. There ought to be two distinct kinds of marriage, one governed by the state with rules enforced on all citizens, the other governed by the church with rules enforced by her on her own members, the distinction ought to be quite sharp, so that a man knows which couples are married in the Christian sense and which are not. So much for the Christian doctrine about the permanence of marriage. Something else even more unpopular remains to be dealt with. Christian wives promise to obey their husbands in Christian marriage. The man is said to be the head. Two questions obviously arise here. Why should there be a head at all? Why not equality? Two, why should it be the man? One, the need for some head follows from the idea of marriage is permanent. Of course, as long as the husband and wife are agreed, no question of a head need arise. And we may hope that this will be the normal state of affairs in the Christian marriage. But when there is a real disagreement, what is to happen? Talk it over, of course. But I'm assuming they have done that and still failed to reach agreement. What do they do next? They cannot decide by majority vote, for in a council of two, there can be no majority. Surely only one or the other or two things can happen. Either they must separate and go their own ways, or else one or the other of them must have a casting vote. In marriage is permanent. One or the other party must, in the last resort, have the power to deciding the family policy. You cannot have a permanent association without a constitution. Two, if there must be a head, why the man? Well, firstly, is their very serious wish that it should be the woman. As I have said, I am not married myself, but as far as I can see, even a woman who wants to be the head of her own house does not usually admire the same state of things when she finds it's going on next door. She is much likely to say, poor Mr. X, why he allows that appalling woman to boss him about. The way she does is more than I can imagine. I do not think she is even very flattered if anyone mentions that fact of her own headship. There must be something unnatural about the rule of wives over husbands, because the wives themselves are half ashamed of it and despise the husband whom they rule. But there is also another reason, and here I speak quite frankly as a bachelor, because it is a reason you can see from outside even better than from inside. The relations of the family to the outer world what might be called as foreign policy must depend in the last resort upon the man, because he always ought to be, and usually is, much more just the outsider. A woman is primarily fighting for her own children and husband against the rest of the world. Naturally, almost in a sense, rightly, their claims override for her all the other claims that she is special trustee of their interest. The functions of the husband, it is to see that this natural preference of hers is not given its head. He has the last word in order to protect other people from the intense family patriotism of the wife. If anyone doubts this, let me ask a simple question. If your dog has bitten a child next door, or if your child has hurt the dog next door, which would you sooner have to deal with? The master of the house or the mistress? Or if you are a married woman, let me ask this question. Much as you admire your husband, would you not say that his chief failing is his tendency not to stick up for his rights and your
force against the neighbors as vigorously as you would like a bite of an appeaser.
Okay, that's the end of chapter 6. And thank you guys for being here with me. And I hope you found this very interesting, these 2 chapters. Please, guys, do not forget to subscribe, give me a thumbs up, share, comment, hit the bell for notifications, follow me on Instagram, and I will talk to you guys in my next video. Bye.